Hi guys, welcome to Sustainable Stace. Today we're going to talk about beekeeping basics and how to go through the various parts and pieces of just a basic Langstroth hive so that you know how everything fits together and what the purpose of each component is. Stay tuned for this episode of Sustainable Stace.
I'm Stacy Taves. For me, healthy food and sustainability are totally connected. You can grow it yourself. Nature is generous.
Hi guys, welcome back. We're going to cover on this episode of Sustainable Stace, putting together and understanding how each piece and part of a Langstroth hive works together. I'm just going to go from the bottom up and go through my basic understanding and what I've experienced over the years of keeping bees. All my stuff has been used, so it looks like real beekeeping stuff. This is the base or the foundation for a hive, and the bees are always going to come through the entrance. This is called the bottom board, and it slides in and out. I live on the west coast of Canada. In winter, the coldest it gets usually is -5 or -10 for a short period of time. In summer, it gets up to maybe +30 for Fahrenheit, up to 90 degrees or so. With few exceptions, I always keep the bottom board right out so that ventilation is coming through, but it's there and really helpful for testing for mites, which we can cover another time. What goes next on top of your bottom board is where the bees are going to live. And keep in mind that in each hive, there's one queen with all of her young. Mostly females who do the work, and a few boys called drones who show up in the hot season for breeding to keep the queen fertile so she keeps on producing. That space that's right here in the front under this box is going to be where the bees come and go. Now, I usually reduce that entrance. This is the entrance to the hive. I put a block of wood across part of it so that when there's predators, which in my world is mostly wasps, the wasps are wanting to come in and catch the larva baby bees to feed back to their babies because wasps tend to be carnivorous. If I reduce the hive entrance, then the bees don't have as big of an area to guard. But that's the entrance where the bees will come through. And this will be called a super or a deep. And inside here is where you're going to have hanging frames. Think of like a hanging file folder. Every box is going to have 10 of these, and this is designed to fit right inside there with 9 of its friends, and all of them would fit inside there parallel to each other. Now this is a piece of wood, and usually at a shop where you're buying supplies, this will be 4 separate pieces, and I power nail them together. And then into there, you put in a sheet of foundation or wax. Now this is a sheet of foundation or wax designed to go right inside there, and the bees will then draw out wax onto it that's called foundation or comb. But I tend to use sheets of wax that have, as you can see here, a little different wire running through it, which means when these get put in a extractor and they spin around on what's basically a centrifuge, the wire helps hold the wax together. Now, some companies have started to produce product, including the Flow Hive, that's dealing with plastic comb. And plastic comb is not desirable to bees generally. If they're given a choice of a wood frame with real wax, they're going to build foundation onto here before they're going to build it onto plastic. But this does exist. It's out in the market. I've been advised by many not to use it, and I haven't. Now, once you've put those together, this frame going in with the wax inside it, the bees are going to start to get busy. I was shocked my first year keeping bees at how much work it takes for them to go from a straight sheet of wax that's hanging to actually that sheet of wax being drawn out. Bees are perfectionists at building hundreds of hexagons. Hexagons are physically or structurally very strong, and they hold a lot of weight. When one of these frames is full of honey on both sides, it could hold 7-8 pounds of honey. It can get very heavy. So those are all going to be hanging in there side by side by side, and the bees will travel between those different frames inside there, drawing out the comb. If you put a bunch of new bees and their queen into a box with no food, and it's just a bunch of undrawn out foundation, they're going to have a lot of work. It takes a lot more work for bees to build the foundation than to fill the foundation. And if you're not ready for that as a rookie, beware. I just want to give you 2 other ideas because you're going to start realizing there's a lot of parts and pieces. If you're just interested in some honey, go find a beekeeper and make them your friend. If you're interested in learning about bees, then consider being a beekeeper. It's a big commitment. Not that it takes a lot of time every week, but you could be out some money at the get-go. You could have some setbacks that surprise you, and in many ways, if you read my blogs on beekeeping, it'll feel after a while what it really is. The bees are keeping you more than you're keeping the bees. Now, as I mentioned, This starts to get pretty heavy when you get 10 of these full of honey. If that does happen, it's a beautiful thing, right? If you get greedy and take all the honey out and you're coming into fall and winter, remember the bees collected that for themselves for energy for the winter. That was them filling the pantry. You go and rob their pantry, you just set up a situation that's going to result in their demise over the course of the winter. So we have to be careful about how greedy we are. Considering that that can get so heavy, what is now available is a smaller or more shallow box. You can see how much less deep it is. It's called a Dayton, and a Dayton is obviously going to be a little less heavy, and it comes with proper size frames and sheets of wax for it. So that's what that would look like. Usually my bees go into winter with 2 boxes, something like this. It might be 2 deeps, it might be 2 Daytons, and they crowd together in the center to stay warm. And over the summer months, they start to populate as the queen lays lots of eggs. They start to bring into each of those cells that I showed you. One of 3 things happens in each of these hexagon cells. Either the queen's going to lay an egg, a little larva. It'll look like a tiny little white C, the letter C inside there, and they will cap it with wax to keep it safe. And that's where the baby's going to start to grow and then ultimately hatch. But they also might put other things into those cells. They might put in pollen, which comes from the center of flowers generally. That's protein to feed the babies. The pollen you'll find is like the nursery food. It's going to be near the babies. And the other thing that beekeepers assume is going to be there or hope's going to be there is honey, which comes from the nectar. So nectar or pollen or babies. And when you look at a frame, and we'll do that another day in another episode, you'll see all those happening nearby to each other. Obviously, if you've got a queen laying a bunch of babies, you don't want that next to honey that you're going to extract, because you could put the honey in an extractor and then spin all the babies out as well. So people have thought of a way to respond to that, and they call it a queen excluder. The queen is generally a little bit bigger than the other bees in the hive. So generally, this is put between boxes, not always, and some beekeepers don't use them. These can be made out of plastic or metal. These are designs that worker bees can get through, but the queen cannot. Sometimes the queen has a slender figure and she makes it through, and you'll open up your box thinking honey should be up here, baby should be down there with the queen, and she's managed to scooch through with her narrow body and she's laying babies up here, and that's going to make it a little confusing for you. This usually only gets put on with another box when the weather's warm, the queen's laying well down here, and you're hoping to collect lots of honey up here. Let's pretend we've put the excluder in between here. So the queen's down here with her brood, the babies, the honey's being collected up here, and sometimes I'll notch a little entrance in here so the bees can come in here as well. And then we move towards what usually will be sold to you for a Langstroth hive, which is what they call an inner cover. An inner cover is designed to pretty much put a lid on it. And it usually has a little handle like this in the top, and I've tried many different things using these inner covers. I've tried notching them as well, as you can see here, so that there'd be an entrance for the bees to come in and out so they could enter the top or the bottom. But my experience has been consistent on the west coast where I live. This holds in moisture, it holds in humidity, and as it tries to leave the hive, the moisture and humidity comes up to the ceiling, it hits this, and it falls back down. And the result is mold and fungus and really unhealthy conditions for the bees inside here. So I've created a new thing that you might have seen in other places as well. Some people will call an attic, some will call a quilt box, but I don't use one of these. Instead, I take a shallow hive like this, a shallow hive box, and I tightly stretch a coffee sack in the bottom, and this becomes basically an attic. And I put that on top, and that becomes the new ceiling. And inside this coffee box, this on top of the coffee sack, I'll half fill it with dry sawdust or shavings. Now the beautiful thing here is that when you go to put your top cover on your box, all the moisture that was traveling up gets caught by the sawdust. So this is a top outer cover that goes on, but the problem I learned is that if I used what they were trying to sell me, the inside of my top cover got totally busted and rotten and cracked and didn't work at all. And so one of the first things to do when you're checking your bees for their health and well-being is when you open up the lid to see if there's moisture here. And if there's moisture here, you've got too much humidity coming up through your box, and you're gonna have a problem for the health of your bees. You're gonna have to create a quilt box or some other way to ventilate them. So that's kind of getting going on what goes into a beehive. I'll just drop this down a little bit. And just the other things is that what type of things are you going to put on your body to get in there? And there's a lot of things that are offered or sold. I'm pretty simple. I go out to my hive with a total of 3 things. I go out with a hive tool, which is designed for pulling apart the frames and lifting them up. I put on some leather gloves that are designed to come up to the elbow because I've used shorter gloves or thinner gloves and I get stung through the hands. I don't always, but I often have anaphylactic reactions when I get stung, so I've decided getting stung isn't my best friend. And then a bee suit, and these can come in many parts or all together. This is a one-piece unit. It's got the legs, it's got the torso, and it's got the head cover, but you can buy just a head cover or a head cover and a torso and such. And if bees are really upset with you, honest, truthful, they'll sting through this and through a t-shirt underneath it if they're really getting you and your clothing is pulled tight, even your bee suit. So sometimes putting on some layers, but also when you go into bees, you want it to be warm and sunny, which means it's going to be really hot inside your suit. So you got to decide how you're going to play the weather game. I hope that gets you thinking about looking after bees and what might be involved in caring for bees of your own. I want to give you one other piece of advice before I go. Don't start with 1, start with 2 hives. If you're really going to do it, if you're going to really take the plunge, take the advice of 2 hives is way better than 1. And the reason is no 2 hives behave the same, and there's always resources if they're disease-free that you can share between the 2. If you have just 1 hive, you don't know what normal is because that's all you've got as a baseline. With 2, you're going to see that there's so much variance, so much intricacy with what's going on in each hive. I've had different colored pollen come into adjacent hives, different color honey come into adjacent hives, and if I lose a queen in one, I can take brood from the one that has a queen to pass over for them to turn into a queen. So get 2 hives if you're going to take the plunge. It's going to be way better in the long run for your ability to grow and flourish as a beekeeper. So if you want to keep on finding out more YouTube episodes, please subscribe down here to our YouTube channel. You'll get an email in your inbox letting you know about each YouTube video that we put out. Check out sustainablestace.com up here to find out more of our videos, our resources, and our blog posts. Until next time, I hope you have a good time jumping into beekeeping.